Hey, what's up everyone? I'm back in town finally since earlier this week, and I want to make a final update video. This video will have 3 sections, including graveyard crafting, absurdly powerful gear for cheap, gear that cost me a mirror last league is like 30 divines this league, which is wild. The second section will be a template for those who are going Mageblood, since Magebloods are very available, how to maximize your damage, and lastly, I'm going to do a quick update on my current version of Self-Chill Trapper, which the one this league is the fastest version of the build that I've ever played. It's faster than the one I made last league, and I have maybe 1/10 of the investment. Feel free to skip around, timestamps are in the description. First, let's talk about the graveyard. You can make absolutely busted gear in the graveyard, and the 2 most busted pieces of gear you can make are an 8-link helmet and a Sadist Garb. But let's start with the helm. I think people have asked me that question the most, and it's been the most requested. Once they patched the influence gear in the graveyard a couple weeks ago, I set about figuring it out, and I realized after spending some currency testing that you could still awaken the fracture, which means crafting the helmet I made last league that cost me multiple mirrors is now absurdly cheap because you can target fracture, trap, and mind damage, like 30 divines cheap. And not only that, the graveyard can spit out several bases which are valuable, so the odds are that you can also profit, especially if you're able to craft helms for the meta builds this league like DD or Brands or Ice Nova. And in fact, that's why I use Blizzard Crown instead of a Hubris Circlet. Hubris Circlet is a better base, but Blizzard Crown is better for currency. The real power of the graveyard is not making completed items, it's making items that are easy to complete. Trap and mind damage is an absolute pain to roll with horror essences, but if we can get it fractured up, the other mods that we want in order to make an 8-link helmet are very easy to roll. I've dropped a link to the graveyard to use for helms in the description. It's going to poop out like 8 hats, all split, either Elder or Shaper influenced, and the idea is to go 3 mods, fracture 2 of them, and split it, which gives us very good odds of landing trap and mind damage by itself. You'll also get other good bases like Hypothermia by itself, which crafted sells for about 40 divines, or a concentrated effect by itself, which also sells for a lot, as it's an excellent way to make high budget +2 AoE helms safely. Like I said earlier, if you want the best base for this build, Hubris Circlet is the best, but you can make yourself currency if you settle for a Blizzard, which is what I did earlier. Once you have a fractured trap and mind hat, you're going to want to awaken it with any Elder mod. The way to do this is a bit different than normal. You'll need 1 additional non-fractured Shaper affix on the helm. Once you do that, you can awaken it like normal. It might take a couple tries if it selects the fractured mod, but it will eventually work. From here, we're going to start with a few horror essences and some annuls. You don't need many, you just want the horror mod and an open suffix. Once you have the horror mod isolated, Benchcraft suffix cannot change and reforge cold. This gives you a 1 in 5 chance of landing any tier of Hypothermia. If you miss, YOLO annul any suffix that rolled and go again. If you need to, reuse a horror essence. So this is why you won't need too many, but have a few on hand to re-roll the mod. Once you have your suffixes complete, you'll want to buy a handful of wild bristle matrons, about 12 or so on average to hit concentrated effect. And you'll also want to purchase a pile of exalted orbs and scours for the next part. To get concentrated effect, we're going to clean the prefixes, then bench flat mana to block mana from exalting, and then exalted orb twice. With mana blocked, it's about 4% of the mod pool to hit concentrated effect, so you'll need to repeat this process on average about 12 times. At the time of recording, matrons are 10 for 8 divines, so you're looking at around 10 divines total to do this. To finish the craft once you have concentrated effect, I would just bench +1 AoE gems and Exalt Slam if you have another open prefix, and you've got a huge damage Uber Shredder for the expected cost of about 30 to 40 divines. This 8-link helmet, depending on your configuration, is between 50 and 80% more damage than a +2 gems chest. It frees up 2 sockets and allows you to roll a huge tanky Sadist Garb, which is also very easy to graveyard craft or buy off trade this league. The Sadist Garb can give you tons of aura effect for hatred and your defensive auras, and in general are the best way to stack defenses for a trickster. If you're looking for a bit higher budget, you can adjust the graveyard to spit out 2 fractures and look for Trap and Mind and Hypothermia together. These combined make it much easier to unveil +2 AoE gems because it becomes very easy to re-horror for concentrated effect if you miss the unveil. But with Veiled Orbs at 12 divines currently, I can't say I recommend it, but it was what I had in mind when I made my first helmet a couple weeks ago. If you want super high budget damage, yesterday somebody finished a Mirable Helm with a power charge prefix. I'd consider trying to craft one this league with a friend, but the expected costs were just too high for our available farming time. Next, let's talk about chest options once you have a high damage helmet. Sadist Garb is by far the best choice because of synergies with Escape Artist and high flat energy shield given from the chest. This league, you can make nearly perfect ones in the graveyard. Tuna actually did a really excellent layout for these, which I'll link in the description below, or you can buy one off trade. I bought this base for 15 divines a few days ago because I've had my fill of buying corpses, and then just Loathing Essence and Exalted Orb until I hit a second mod that I wanted, in this case T1 Elemental Resistance. But you could also look for chaos resistance or suppression or whatever you need. To finish the implicits, if you aren't already aware, there's a nice trick with Orb of Conflicts to elevate one side without spending all of the most expensive currency. You want to roll the mod you'd like to elevate first using graders, which are fairly cheap. Usually you can do this for a divine or two worth of them. In my case, I wanted a higher tier of aura effect, so I rolled that. Then I bought 4 exceptional icors. These exceptionals need to be the other implicit. The Orb of Conflict, if we read it, says the chance of raising or lowering a modifier depends on its relative strength, so we are going to use these exceptionals of the other implicit as fodder to elevate the one that we want. If you win the Orb of Conflict gamble, you use another exceptional to get another higher tier fodder implicit. If you lose the gamble, don't use another exceptional, just Orb of Conflict again, as it will be an even higher chance for you to elevate the one that you want. And you keep going like this until you're happy, and then finish the other side with graders or grands or whatever your budget allows. Next, I want to cover how you can upgrade your build to a Mageblood in 324 and still get max traps on the ground without needing Swift Assembly or having to deal with high mana costs. Swift Assembly is numerically one of the best supports for traps, but once you are able to throw enough traps you're at or near the cap, it becomes a dead support, and using something else becomes a lot more damage. Mageblood mana cost reduction was deleted from the game in 324, so we need to solve throwing a high volume of traps in another way. This league I'm using a Slavedriver's hand to accomplish this, and it turns out there are a lot of really nice benefits to doing so. I'm going to talk about this in 2 different configurations. First, a relatively inexpensive one that only requires a few divines worth of Circle of Guilt rings and is not self-chill, but actually does a bit more damage just with less movement speed. Consequently, it's also easier to set up. So first and most importantly, let's talk about solving the cost of the skill. This POB is in the description, you can take a look at it, but the answer is with a lot of life regen. With 3 changes, I'm able to drop all the mana cost reduction items that we needed before entirely and switch over to spending life for my traps. Number 1, I'm using a high level vitality plus arrogance. You can use the 2 sockets freed up by switching to the 8-link helmet for this. It will provide a lot of life regen. Number 2, I'm using the Flask suffix from Katarina that gives me 3% flat life regen, and with the Mageblood and Flask effect, it ends up being about 6%, just under 6%. Number 3, I'm socketing a Rational Doctrine, which is both defensive and offensive. I get 50% reduced effective curses, 5% life regen, 100% increased crit strike chance, and a reduction in the resistances of anything I hit. It ends up being incredibly strong for one jewel socket. However, it requires you manage your stats. All told, this gives me somewhere in the 700 to 1000 range life regen against a trap throwing cost of about 500 life per second if I'm spamming them, and you'll find this will also make you quite a bit more durable, as life regen is a potent mitigation for dots and degens and makes for a more comfy playstyle. There are a few nice tricks for managing stats that I'll share with you really quickly to get Rational Doctrine to work. You can buy level 84 medium clusters and roll them for stats with fundamental fossils or harvest targeting things like surprise sabotage. I also use dexterity tattoos to keep my dex lower, and grab Master of Blades for another 30 strength, and the lifespan damage mastery, which is very strong now that we're spending life. Once my int and strength are reasonably close, I'll Blessed Orb my Mageblood to get them perfectly aligned. There are lots of ways to do this, and it's kind of tedious, but it's something you only really have to do once, and then you can ignore it. In this first setup, I'm using Circle of Guilt or Circle Ambition rings. What you're looking for are Herald of Purity buff effect and physical damage with Herald of Purity on. You can catalyst it for more effect and then use a Calandra's Touch or just a second ring if you get another Circle of Guilt. These rings look like 1 or 2 divines with the right affixes on trade right now. Now, to take advantage of the other part of Slavedriver's hand, the cast speed buff to traps. Cast speed is much more available than trap throwing speed. You can bench higher values on weapons. You can get 17% cast speed on Flask, which with a Mageblood ends up being about 13% more damage. You can roll Veiled Suffixes with Arcane Surge. You can get natural rolls of Essences for cast speed too. It's just kind of everywhere, and trap throwing speed in comparison is much more difficult to source. Not only that, your Frenzy charges will now grant you an additional 28% trap throwing speed in the form of additional cast speed. I'll demonstrate the difference in what it looks like with this pair of Raleckesh boots. Your Frenzy charges now give 98% more trap throwing speed when you combine charge traps and Slavedrivers. In this configuration, my trap throwing speed is 0.21 seconds, which is just as fast as my self-chilled version, which was much higher budget from last league. I've done 6 party Ubershaver carries in this configuration. It's very strong and not terribly difficult to set up. If you are looking to speed farm bosses or Ubers, you can still go self-chill. I've done that this league. I've combined both the Slavedriver's hand setup with self-chill for what is the fastest version of this build that I've ever played. It's comically fast with the action speed boost from self-chill. It brings my trap cast time down to 0.16 seconds, which is unreal. I want to caution someone who's a newer player that this is more complicated to get right For example, it's important that you have reasonable chaos resistance. You'll be taking a bit more damage from Forbidden Rite that you need to also mitigate with your life regen, and you'll need to give up both ring slots for Call of the Void and Winterweave, which makes it a bit more annoying to deal with resistances. This version of the build can do sub 2-minute Uber Shaper runs though, so for those who are interested in it, I am dropping the POB in the description. By far the most frustrating part about self-chill this league will be crafting a scepter because of the high cost of veiled orbs. You can get unlucky and easily burn 100 divines looking for one mod, so only do this if you are sure that's what you want. Finally, I was asked about some modifications to the build for running T17 maps. What I've done this league to farm them is equip a Darkseer, which gives me a ton of additional flat life and energy shield as well as malediction to make things a bit safer, and I traded in my dual heralds for determination and occasionally an armor flask instead of a quicksilver, depending on how dangerous the mods look. This brings my EHP up a considerable amount, though several T17s can still be rippy. I also have a couple corrupted rings that are specialized for poison and bleed so that I can ignore those modifiers entirely if it rolls. You can roll this build quite a bit tankier if you wanted. This is just what felt comfortable for me. Check the League Start guide notes for ways to go tankier by adding recoup or additional defensive layers. I've done a few different T17 farming tests with moderate success, but ultimately I just don't love T17s because of how juiced the modifiers combined with the league mechanic can be, and you really need an efficient mapper if you want to farm them, and this build's better as a high movement, high damage bossing. This setup has been decently comfortable to run them though, and I've done challenge completion for those in my guild and those in Global 4040 because of the way that bossing challenges shook out this league. I've added my regex that I used for maps since Tempest Mine asked for it. Note this is about twice as long as the available characters, so you'll need to split it up if you want to actually use it in your highlights. Alright, I'm going to start working on some of the new gems and new build. This is one of my favorite parts of the league, tinkering something weird and new. I was looking at maybe something auto bomber adjacent with the new tornado gem, or maybe working in some kind of rage spell setup that I have a few ideas for. If I come across something really fun to play, I'll share it with you guys. Otherwise, I hope you're having a good league, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.